The recording is in progress. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out. I want to thank the mayor for helping orchestrate this, as well as our partners at DEEP and the health department. I want to first thank you on behalf of the Six Lakes Coalition. We have many great community members and partners in this. So this is not our expansive list, but Christian Tabernacle Baptist Church, Congregation Organizing for New Connecticut, also known as Connect, Connecticut Land Conservation Council, the Farmington Canal Commission, the Hampden Alliance for Trees, the Hampden Chamber of Commerce, the Hampden Land Conservation Trust, Newhall Neighborhood Organizers, Save the Sound, South Central Regional Land Conservation Alliance, Springline Church, of course, our great partners through the town, the West River Water Association, Whitneyville Civic Association, and a host of other great community organizations and concerned citizens. So I first wanted to have the opportunity to pass it over to the mayor and Ms. Hayes and go from there. So.
Hello, everyone. So we were here, well, we were at Keith last time, but our last update was in June of last year. And a lot of work has been done since that time. Several of us went on a walkthrough for the Inland Wetlands Commission. It was very mosquito-y. I don't really recommend it. But a lot of work has been done by Olin and DEEP to test and see what more needs to be done. This is going to be a project that will take a lot of time. And I think it's important that we're patient and we make sure that it's done right. But I also want to thank the advocates who are helping to drive this project forward, particularly Save the Sound and the Six Lakes Coalition. Without their advocacy, this project, I'm sure, would have still been stalled. We have been talking about, Justin Farmer and I have been talking about this project for a few years now. And we've been talking with our state delegation, with the governor's office, and they all seem very supportive, which is exciting. And I wanted to make sure that my voice was on the record. So several months ago, I sent a letter to our governor and our state delegation, making sure that they understood very plainly that we want Olin Powder Farm, Six Lakes to be a park that, a state park that everyone has access to. That this park will have some recreation and that we want this park to be remediated to a high standard so that everyone can use it. So that's some of what has gone on behind the scenes, and I'm really excited to hear more from DEEP because they have been tracking this project very closely. So thank you so much to DEEP and Department of Public Health for being with us today to go through all of this information. I appreciate it. Ms. Hayes? Thank you.
I would just like to say thank you. A hearty, I have a mouth in my hand, but a hearty welcome. I am so delighted to see all of you. And I'm just going to give a brief history of the Pine Swamp. We call it Six Lakes. This will be a gem for the community. A place, a tranquil place, a tranquil oasis for you to go to. This is not just for Hampden, but for the region. And we love for you to be patient, because this will take some time to get done. But we are committed to make progress as we go, as the years go by. It's gonna take some time, but we're just asking you to be patient. And I thank you again for coming out. Thanks.
I am gonna invite up, Deep and the Department of Health from the state, so Mark Lewis and Ray Freegon. They have been working, on this project for a number of years. And, Ray was instrumental in the cleanup in Southern Hampton before, so thank y'all for coming out and doing this once again.
Great. Thank you, Justin. Also, thank you, Elizabeth and Mayor Garrett. We really appreciate the invitation this evening. So I'm going to introduce the folks from Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection that are with us here this evening in the room. First, we have Mark Lewis. Mark, if you wouldn't mind standing. Mark is our supervisor for the South Central part of the state. Next, we have John Duff. John is our project manager for the Pine Swamp, AKA Powder Farm property that we're talking about this evening. We also have another project manager from our division, which by the way is the remediation division at Deep. That's Katie Nee. Thank you, Katie. And we also have a representative from one of our very, very close colleagues at Department of Public Health, and that is Cherie Rusnick. All right, so that's your, I'm sorry, and I'm Ray Freegon, Director of Deep's Remediation Division. So just briefly, Remediation Division, we're involved with the environmental investigation and cleanup of polluted sites all across the state of Connecticut. Every corner of the state and any type of contaminant from very small to very large. And of course, the Pine Swamp site is a very complex project. And before we go any further, I'd like to see a show of hands. If you were present for the public meeting that we held roughly a year ago for our, what I would call a kickoff meeting. Okay, roughly, I'm going to guess it's around 50%. So we'll take a little bit of time at the get-go before we get into the heart of the substance, that being the data that's been collected in the last year from the property. We've taken soil, groundwater, and soil vapor tests from the property, and John's going to roll through the data that's been collected. So with that, I'm going to call up John to provide our overview. We expect that our presentation will take roughly 30-40 minutes in that ballpark, and we're certainly leaving plenty of time for questions this evening.
Somebody change the slides. I'll just say, change slides. And will that work?
Yeah.
All right, great, thanks. Hi, my name is John Duff. I am the project manager for the Olin Pine Swamp property. A few seconds ago, you just had the agenda up, so you have an idea of the flow of how it's gonna go. So Olin Pine Swamp, also known as Powder Farm, is a privately owned property, consists of 102 acres. About 50% of it is water, the other 50% land. The property also receives stormwater runoff from surrounding areas, and it's located in a section of Hamden that is surrounded by commercial properties, industrial, residential, and municipal mix. Next slide. So just a little bit about the background, since about 50% of you weren't here, I'll see if we can just go through this relatively quickly to kind of move it along. So the property was originally came into existence back in the late 1880s. It was originally purchased by Winchester Repeating Arms Company. It was used in the early 1900s for the storage of gunpowder, mainly. This was done in a series of approximately 30 bunkers on the property. It was also used for ammunition testing shooting range for the development of weapons. Also, in later years, it was used for the burning and disposal of plant scraps and materials. 1966, Hampton Department of Public Health ordered the cessation of the burning and dumping on the property. And in 1975, all the bunker systems that were located on the property were demolished and removed. The early 1980s is when environmental investigation began. This was conducted by Olin. In 1986, that's when the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection came involved with the property, known before as a DEP. And we came in together with Olin with a consent order. So it's basically ordering Olin to investigate, perform additional investigation or remediation of the property, but it's with Olin's cooperation. It wasn't like an adversarial situation. So the late 1980s, there was additional investigative work that was performed on the property. And it was really in the 1990s that Olin did do a considerable amount of remediation work. So then from the 1990s, for about the next 20 years after that, there were some bigger pressing issues that demanded the focus of the department and Olin. So priorities shifted away from this property to some other areas. So it wasn't until about 20 years later that department's focus shifted back with Olin to take a look at this property again and to put it back on the agenda. It wasn't until until 2022 that that Olin began looking at the historic information of the site and trying to determine what is really needed in order to fully investigate the property and to clean it up and bring it back to where it should be. So in 2023, last year, why we're really here to talking tonight is going over what Olin did last year. Olin developed an initial work plan to reinvestigate the components of the 1986 order. So let me just stretch that, like the majority of the work that Olin has done for the investigation last year was really dealing with the 1986 order, okay? Next slide. So also keep in mind that 2023 is a focus. I want to just say that the next few slides is basically to show and identify far more areas of concern than what the order has, what is in the order and what Olin has investigated the past year. I think it's important for you guys to see that it's not just a couple of areas that really needs a focus, but the site in its entirety is going to really need some sort of level of investigation. Now, the areas that Olin recently covered, those areas really did need an extensive amount of work as far as like investigative and data collection. Other areas of investigation or other areas of concern that I'm going to show you may not need that level, but it really does need to be looked at before we can consider the property clean. Next slide. Okay, so these are the 5 to 7 areas. I call them 7 areas because they're broken out a little bit further up and further on the slides. But the 1986 consent order focused on these areas. Number 1, the east-west burning grounds, incinerator ash disposal area, which is in the southeast portion of the site. The southeast kettle area, located in the eastern portion of the site. Battery waste area, the Annixter property located in number 5. And then you'll see that there's a yellow dot where there was a central disposal area. That area really wasn't known in the past, but based on Olin and cooperation with us, we went through a lot of the past environmental reports and kind of discovered an area that was kind of being overlooked. So you'll see a lot of the focus areas also will overlap. So even though they're going to be extensive, a lot of these will overlap and the investigative work will handle many of the areas at the same time. Next. So just going on the non-consent orders, potential release areas. So we call it different things, but they're roughly, you know, they can be, if it's like an area of concern, that's kind of area of known contamination. So potential release area is areas that there may be some information that there might be contamination there. And that's what I'm talking about, that they may need to have to go and take a further look at. So as you can see on this slide in particular, we have 7, where there's the wet well up on the northern portion of the property, a target area on the eastern portion, machine gun mounts located in the north central portion. Now, area number 4 is the system of brick bunkers. There's approximately 30 on site. You're not going to see it on this slide, but you're going to see it in 2 slides later. The slide would have been extremely busy and really confusing, so I held that for its own slide on it by itself. Then you got concrete block footing. So this is where Olin went out and took a look, found just footings that there must have been a building there at some point in time. So naturally, obviously, there's something need to take a look at. An exposed slag area noted up in northern portion of the property, as well as 4 areas of demolition debris. So these are just additional areas that there's just debris sitting there that got dumped at some point in time. Next slide. About 5 more areas. You got the unauthorized dumping areas where apparently, I'm going to say either locals or probably most likely non-locals have a lot of stuff they want to get rid of, and what's the best place to do it is over a fence and a wooded piece of property, just so it's out of their garage. So unfortunately, there was a couple areas of unauthorized dumping that was discovered on the property. You have the shotgun proofing area right in the center. A brick cistern was noted up in the northeastern portion of the property. You have former sand trap piles, which was part of just the proofing area. More non-demolition debris, which means just trash. And then, of course, the pond systems themselves. That is an area that obviously needs to be taken a look at as well to see if there's any contamination that exists in that. Next. So here's, you see the bunker systems. So obviously you can see how I didn't put it on all in one slide. It's just impossible to do so. So as I was saying, each one of these locations really needs to be taken a look at and evaluated in some form. Also, looking at the size of the property, keep in mind the challenges that Olin has or is going to experience investigating the entire site. Number 1, you have the size of the property. It's 102 acres. Then 2, you have the topography. There's nothing flat on this property. It's all hills, kettles, anything you can imagine. Then the entire property is wooded, as you guys know. So it's very difficult to get a lot of machinery in there needed to take the sampling that needs to be done. Also with this investigation, much of the area is discovered to be wetlands. So then you have wetland issues you have to that creates a challenge for you as well. Having to get the appropriate paperwork and permits to do an investigation in the wetland areas. And finally, wildlife. You wouldn't think wildlife, but in a couple of slides, I'm going to explain a little bit more on that. So I'm just going to leave that hanging for you. Next. All right, so why were we revisiting the order? I mean, because 20, 30 years ago, we already did the investigation for those locations. Well, the reason why we're doing it is it's just time. I mean, a lot of things can happen in 20, 30 years. So the data right now, we really consider too old. It can give us good guidance where to go from, but as far as like relying on that data and comparing it to new regulations and standards, it just wouldn't stand up the test, okay? So data's too old. Technology has advanced, obviously, over the 30 years. So we have better technology to collect the data. Laboratory detection is far better. And like I was saying, we have new standards that developed over the past 20, 30 years. And finally, the last thing we need to do is to try and fill in data gaps. Now, when I'm saying fill in data gaps, we have a considerable amount of data, but in order to create like a cost-effective remedial action plan, you really need to collect enough data so that you have the full extent and degree of the impact with the goal of creating a three-dimensional model. Now, I keep thinking like, oh, three-dimensional, like my hand is gonna make magic or anything. No, it's not, but it's just like trying to envision what we're trying to do is collect enough data. So we have an idea three-dimensionally of how deep the contamination is, how far it spreads, and then looking at like the concentrations that are there so that we don't have to waste a lot of money for a remedial action plan that may not be effective. So that's why we want to create, collect as much information as possible. Next. This slide, we can jump over real quick. This is just where the investigations are taking place. The 5 to 7 areas of concern from the 2000 or the 1986 order. Next. So, for the 2023 investigation, what are some of the things that Olin has accomplished? So one of the main things Olin has accomplished is being able to better identify the wetland area on the property, being able to delineate where the wetlands are and where the wetlands are not. For the 2023 investigation, Olin has inspected 46 existing monitor wells. So one of the things that we try to do is reuse some of the equipment that we have from the past. And what they do is go out and do an investigation to see whether or not some of the wells are still capable of being able to produce the data that we need today. Olin has also deployed 50 soil vapor boring points, completed 98 direct push soil borings, installed 11 new monitor wells in areas that they would find advantageous, and sampled a total of 23 monitor wells to evaluate the groundwater condition. And this then finally evaluating all of those results compared to the Connecticut Remediation Standard regulations. Next. So soil vapor investigation. This is kind of like a first step and is really used as like a screening tool. So the soil vapor investigation involves putting a core into the ground about 2 to 3 feet in. And then they put like a sensor down there, seal it, and let it collect some of the vapors in the soil pore space for about, I'm going to say 7 to 10 days. So this is where I'm going to talk about like the environment, the animal interference. So they put in 50 borings, and evidently, I guess the sealing component that they used for the boring points attracted deer. So unfortunately, 24 of the samples were unable to be used. So at least for the 26, it was able to give also a guide of, yes, there is contamination in this area or likely to be in this area. So I'm going to say that the next bunch of slides I'm going to show is not really going to show concentrations, but I want you guys to take a look at the magnitude of the amount of information that Olin has gone to collect to be able to better characterize the areas of concern. Next. Okay, so this is focusing on the southern portion of the property where it consists of the east-west burning grounds, central disposal area, battery waste area, and the annexed area. So these areas right here, as you can see, had a pretty good spread of the soil vapor points. The ones that are indicated in red are the ones that the deer found. Next slide. The next two, the next slide, it shows the 2 areas are more to the east and northeast. You can see there's a good spread on the southeast kettle, which is the northeast portion. But as you can see in the bottom left-hand portion, it looks like sampling is only done on the eastern side. And that's where we're going to go into some of their challenges, is that you'll see in future slides that what's to the left of that is really wetland area. And you really can't collect a lot of data in the wetlands, especially not soil gas, because soil gas is looking for the airspace between the molecules, or the soil molecules. But so if it's underwater at the time, then obviously there's no airspace to collect. Next. So soil borings. Again, I'm going to show you a couple of slides for their soil boring investigations and show you the amount of data that they collected at each one of their areas of concern. Now, placement of each of these samples are based on known historic information and partially driven on the ability to access the area with sampling equipment. Okay? Next slide. All right, so this is showing you, the next slide is going to show you the blow up of the east-west burning grounds. Next. So as you can see from the east-west burning grounds, there wasn't a lot of information on the eastern burning ground, and we had pretty good access. So you can see that it was pretty well covered. The west burning ground, historic information showed that Olin did a considerable amount of remediation work in that area. And so some of those sampling points were more focused, where the areas were known to have contamination. Next slide. Okay, so the next is going to be the battery waste area and central disposal that you'll see next. Both of these areas too, Olin was able to get their equipment in and do a pretty good covering of the area. Now, for some of you that have been out there during the wetlands walk, I think you can kind of appreciate the level of difficulty it really was to get the equipment in there to be able to do that sample. Because frankly, I was there for that walk, and it was very difficult to even just walk into those areas with the bugs and the mud and everything else. So it's really amazing how much information that Olin has put in effort into collecting. Next slide is the annexer area. Go ahead, switch. And as you can see for this area, there's a pretty good grouping on the southern portion of it, and then again on the northern portion. Reason nothing is in the middle is because this is an extremely steep slope. So what they're looking to do is collect the information the best they can, see if they can get a good idea of whether or not they even need to take samples on the slope. Okay, the incinerator ash area would be the next. And I think it came up on an earlier slide, but that blue line is their mapping of the wetland area. So as you can see, it was very difficult for them to get any type of sample in the wetland area. So they focused their investigation on the outskirts, see what type of results they received before they needed to proceed any further. And then finally, this southeast kettle. And for the southeast kettle, it looks like the majority of their soil samples were on the eastern portion. Again, I think the reason why it wasn't a greater covering was access. A lot of wooded access and a lot of steep embankments that they just couldn't get into. And finally, for the monitor wells, I'm going to be able to do this on one slide, and I think you guys can be able to get the gist. Switch to the next. So as the site as a whole, you can see all 23 points where they have monitor wells to sample the monitor well conditions, evaluate the condition. Next slide. So based on the collection of data, comparing it to the current remediation standard regulations. So what do we know? I can't really go into specific chemical components of where they exceeded standards and at what specific locations. There's just way too much data to be able to share with you on that. But what I can tell you, and in summary, is that at each location, there was some chemical or a contaminant component that exceeded the standard for both soil and groundwater. So what else did we get from this investigation? Well, what we got was, a lot more data, update data. And also, we can say that the results supported and confirmed much of the historic data that we have already. But it doesn't quite give us the needed detail to begin cleanup. Because like I said, we really need that three-dimensional approach. So next step. Okay, so next step. Although we focus on the 2023 investigation, which focused on the order from 1986, additional investigation activities really need to be done to get a full picture of the entire impact. Additional information for both soil and groundwater will be needed prior to being able to develop the appropriate remedial action plan. So Oldham's plan right now is they need to, and they're in the process, and they're going to develop additional, more well-refined work plan, collect more information that will give us the level of detail necessary for us to create that remedial action plan. As you can see from not only the 5-7 areas concerned associated with the consent order, I showed you so many other areas of concern, potential areas of concern. I think you can get the idea that this is a challenging site, and it's going to take a lot of time. Obviously, a lot of sources need to be looked at and evaluated to some degree. Maybe not to the degree that these 5 to 7 have recently been investigated, but they're going to have to be looked at to some degree. Next slide. So, for those of you who really want the details on this report, it is available to everyone on the DEP internet site. If you go onto the DEP webpage, you can search for the document portal. All of our records and reports that are submitted to us are electronic now, and they're available to everybody online. Now, if you can't find it on our webpage, sometimes I can't either. I basically just do an internet search and just search CT DEP document search, and this page should come up. A couple of words of advice of looking for our documents online. Less is better. So there's like about 8 categories here to plug in information. What you should do to find this report is just to put in the town, which is the second from the top, and then the address to the right of it, immediately to the right, which would be 475 Putnam. And then since this report was recently submitted within the past couple of weeks, put in the date range of this month only, and that's going to whittle you down to. Next slide. It gives you these 2 entries. Why it gives you 2 entries, I'm not sure, but for some reason it came up as 2 ID numbers. So either one works. You just hit the link to the right that says view. Okay, so I'm going to give you a couple of warnings first. If you really want all the detail of the report, which is very extensive, you're going to get all 3,545 pages of the report. Now, on the good news, only the first 200 really mean anything. That's where all the meat is on the first 200 pages. You have about 40 pages of written text, 20 pages of maps, and about 150 pages of charts that'll make you go blind. But it will give you every piece of information that has been collected, and you can see it all for yourself. All right, next one. So right now, we can take questions. And if you switch one more over, it'll give you during question time, the department contacts. Go ahead. Yeah, sure.
Pardon me as I am all over the place. I forgot to acknowledge some of our electeds who are in the room, so I wanted to do that in case any had to sneak away. But Sarah Cabrera out in the back, our at-large councilperson Lori Sweet, Councilwoman Cardwell, who replaced me on the council. Thank you. Councilman Asmanu, as well, and of course, Jameson Polk, Special Assistant to Sarah Murphy. So I just wanted to acknowledge these people.
Okay, thanks. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I understand that this study was done to bring it up to industrial standard. Why was it not done to bring it up to residential standard?
Okay, so the question was, the study was compared to industrial commercial standard. Are the remediation regulations in the state of Connecticut have two standards right now. One is designed for industrial commercial properties, and the other is designed for, remediation. Now, remediation, residential. So your residential standard would be something that, it doesn't have any restrictions. But the industrial commercial, folks can clean up to that level with restrictions. So it would be either restrictions of, possibly having mechanisms in place that would prevent you from exposure to the chemicals that may be left on property. Or it could be even like time restrictions, and it would also prevent any type of residential activity on the property. So, like I said at the very beginning of the presentation, this is a privately owned piece of property. So with that being said, the owners of the property really have the choice to clean up to whichever standard I'm going to say they want to at this point. But if they clean up to industrial commercial, it would obviously prevent that piece of property used for any type of residential purposes. So right now, as at this time, they are cleaning up to industrial commercial, but Olin indicated that they were open to possibly going further. All right, second.
Can you talk about some of the remediation with fashion?
I'm sorry.
We go to the contamination slide,
Okay.
summary, and I go through what kind of remediation options are available.
I think that hints to where we're going.
It is just before next steps.
People want to come up and use this mic.
That it?
Yep. So, some of the methods that can be used to remediate the contaminants that are there. What can be done is that it's also based on what the contaminant is. So, if it's a contaminant that is, I'm gonna say relatively stable, not moving in the groundwater or in the environment, there can be situations that the contaminant actually be left in place. We can use things called like engineered controls, where an applicant or a site owner can use, sometimes it's a physical barrier to prevent somebody from being exposed to that chemical. But when that's done, I believe that they would have to also institute a monitoring plan to make sure that the chemical or the contaminant stays where it's supposed to, that it's not mold. Other things that they can do is soil excavation. That's usually a popular thing to get rid of it. If it's something that's a volatile, they can do like off gassing. Vapor, they kind of just remove the vapors from the subsurface and run it through like a filter system. So those are some of the things that they can do to clean up. They don't necessarily have to take and remove it. They can actually even treat it in place.
So, I have two questions. The more important question is a follow-up. Oh, I guess I should. So I have two questions.
Yep.
the first one, the second one is not very important. First one is a follow-up on, I guess, the first question, and that is, if we want to make it, wants to turn it into a state park, do we need a residential, level for that, or the other?
I think Ray wants to help me out with this question, but I'll say right now, the only standards we have are residential and industrial commercial.
Right?
So in order for it to be a park, it would have to be residential,
That's what I was thinking.
however.
And yell across the room, but just so that everybody hears, maybe there's folks online. So there will be in the very near future, we anticipate a third classification for passive recreation. As John was explaining, right now, it's either residential, which is
Perfectly.
made perfectly clean. No, zero restrictions. You can garden, you can have a playscape, do whatever you want, zero restriction. To the other alternative, which is industrial commercial. The caveat there is that the property needs to be preserved in perpetuity for an industrial commercial use.
Right. So skip that one.
So yes, that is definitely the desire of the community to skip that option.
So
We got that.
There's gonna be a third classification.
So-
That third classification.
That third classification is essentially passive recreation. So if we're envisioning an opportunity where folks could come and visit this property, walk on trails, that type of thing. Nobody doing any excavation, nobody gardening, doing anything like that.
Well, wait a minute, you might have gardening if you decide to put in, like an arboretum or something like that.
That really depends upon the vision.
Okay,
But, you know, what we collectively
right,
want this property to be.
so,
And then we have to marry that with what Olin Corporation's vision is, because as John indicated, currently, this is privately held property. And they're looking primarily at an industrial commercial standard. So cleaning up to that level may cost X millions of dollars. So to get to a residential or a passive recreation standard, what is that differential? And that is a conversation that we will have with Olin Corporation at the appropriate time. I think the important thing for the community is to maintain your voices being heard of what you would like to see this property to be. So,
and then I have my other question, which is a really dumb question, but what's an annexer? So I'm a retired ballerina and a physicist, so I have to have, I have to have both sides of my brain need all the answers.
Annexter area, I did know the answer to this one. I was the project manager years ago prior to John. But the main point is, with each of these areas of environmental concern, we look at what was the activity or material that was stored or disposed of at that location. From that, we determined what chemicals, what metals, i.e. what contaminant class we need to evaluate. That's going to determine, as John was indicating, what the remedial options are. And the gentleman that asked the question just before you was inquiring about what are the remedial options available. 20 to 30 years ago, the remedial options, I would say, very simple. We're going to excavate because that's the tool that we had at that time. Remove that contaminated material horizontally and vertically. We need to understand that volume that we're dealing with. We remove it and typically place it at a properly permitted landfill. Today, 20, 30 years later, we have so many more tools at our disposal. So when we're talking about volatile organic compounds, in this scenario, we're talking about chlorinated solvents, which is basically a degreasing agent. We have so many more tools. We do not need to excavate anymore. There are injectables that can be applied to the subsurface right into the soil. It's basically a food grade material that acts to speed the,
Stabilizes.
not only stabilize, but dechlorinates. I won't get into the chemistry of it, but it's basically, it's attacking the contaminant itself and aiding in that natural degradation process. So it speeds up that natural process exponentially and can be a very effective remedial strategy. For PCBs, we're still looking at, in most cases, excavation, full
Okay,
removal.
but what does the annexer?
Annexer, I'm sorry, I don't have an answer for you on the annexer. I forgot that one.
That was
Yeah,
that was the
yeah.
original.
But we
Is
can
that
certainly
the
get back to
name
you.
of the property, or is that an amalgam of some chemical
It's more so an activity.
annexer?
Yeah.
Somebody look up what annexing is, please.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Second row.
Hi, I'm here on behalf of the Hampton High School Eco Club. And I'm here with my co-president Lena. And we're just wondering how like we can involve, because I know you probably don't want like a bunch of kids like running around your site and stuff, but we want to get like involved, we want to help, we want to expand more far out from our school and just get involved with our community as well.
For how to get involved, well, first, I'll say it's Olin's site. But at the very beginning, we got this, Mr. Farmer announced all the names of these groups that are involved as well. You can probably speak with Mr. Farmer directly, and he can help you out, let you know how you can get involved. Okay? Well, right here.
What tools do either the state have or does the town have to incentivize what you keep describing as a private entity to remediate this property?
Right?
Very good question. So what incentivizes most people? Money, right? So Olin, I'm not speaking, nor is John, we're not speaking for Olin Corporation, but we work with many, many property owners. In these types of situations, they may determine that it is in their best interest to clean up to the industrial commercial standards, less stringent, less costly. In this particular scenario, again, not speaking for Olin, but they will look at that differential and calculate what it may take financially to achieve that residential standard. In time, when we have the appropriate information to design the remedial strategy and get a cost estimate on both standard, the cleanup to both degrees of cleanup, we can look at what that difference is. There is appealing to Olin's better nature. There is public funds. There are options. Public funds meaning state or federal. We do also work very closely with the Department of Economic and Community Development. That's the State Department. They're typically involved with incentivizing businesses to come into Connecticut or to rehab a brownfield property. So this is technically a brownfield property. But again, DECD's main focus is bringing jobs and driving the economy of the state. Now, I think we all know in this room that having green space is every bit as important, if not more important, than the economic drivers, the businesses, right? It speaks to quality of life. Having green space in your community. So I guess in summary, the answer to this question is by staying involved, showing local and state and beyond leadership that this community is interested in a desired outcome. Also signals to Olin Corporation that there is interest in this property. I mean, ultimately, is it their desire to retain ownership? Probably not. Probably not. Their obligation is to remediate the property, subject to that 1986 consent order, to today's standards, not to 1986 standards. But again, I believe that firmly that remaining engaged and sharing with local leadership that there is this desired outcome that will help pave the way. I'm not saying that it will lead to the outcome that everybody wants, but that's how you get from point A to point B on projects like this. Yes, ma'am, Beth?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I've been recently working with a group of people trying to get, the state legislature to pass the, environmental rights amendment, such that there wouldn't, if something like this were passed, it'd be part of our state constitution. And something like Olin would not have any rights at all to just leave it or to do whatever they wanted with it. However, we didn't get it passed this year, but, this brings me to the second half of my question, which is, do you have any idea whether Olin wants to keep it? Do they want to sell it? I mean, the fact that it's private property is a little scary because could they just leave it there, just the way it is?
No, and yeah. So to answer the first question, Connecticut is about to go through a significant transformation in the way that we address pollution in our state. So right now, we have our flagship program for identifying and requiring parties to clean up pollution is through a statute that is generically referred to as the Property Transfer Act. As an owner of a polluted property that is defined as an establishment under this act, when I sell my establishment property to another party, I have to disclose to DEEP that I have potentially pollution or known pollution, or I just don't know. Then a party to the transfer needs to take on the obligation, financial obligation, to perform that environmental investigation. Is there pollution there? Yes or no? If yes, how bad is it? Does it require cleanup? And if so, implement that cleanup. So we're going from that dynamic, which basically waits until the property is transferred to compel cleanup, or DEEP, under that old process, or DEEP needs to issue an order, either a consent order or an administrative order to compel the responsible party. That could be the property owner or the entity that caused the spill, if it's different than the owner, to clean up that pollution. So we are again going to a new process where it's essentially you spill it, you clean it now. Okay, so this is going to put us in line with virtually every other state. Okay, Connecticut is an outlier. It's one of 2 states in the nation that is transactional based to trigger the cleanup. So we're working very hard to ensure that this becomes the law of the land in due time. And that may be, we're hoping, in 2025. Okay, second part of your question.
Oh, is Olin, do you know if they want to get the
Oh.
property off their hands, or are they just gonna keep it, or, because right now they have the right to just.
They absolutely have the right to keep it. It's their property. They also have that obligation to clean up, investigate and clean up that site, which is what we're pressing them on now. Do they have the ability to sell? Absolutely, just like any other property owner has that option. Given that it has a pollution history, an enforcement history with DEEP, I'll tell you, it will not garner a ton of people running out offering to buy. Okay? Not today. When it ultimately gets cleaned up, yeah, I'm sure there'll be plenty of interest and that could be anything from, you know, a developer that wants to put condominiums on it. Oh, there's waterfront, you know, nice view, you know, whatever. Yeah. It's really, it's up to Olin. Through our conversations with Olin, we have shared that the community has this very strong desire. They know the community has a strong desire. They've heard it themselves as well. Again, I say that it's staying involved, applying the right pressure to folks like John and I and your elected officials to ensure that the investigation and cleanup is staying on task. And then when we get to the stage where, when we come to you with the remedial action plan that's being proposed, I think that's really the time where the conversation starts to shift from, well, what's it gonna be? Yeah, what's your cleanup plan to what's it going to be? What is your vision, Olin? What are you doing with this property? So that we can have a meaningful dialogue with them. And I say we, I mean, DEEP, the community, maybe there's a trust, a land trust out there or a land bank that is willing to step forward and be that, essentially the receiver of that property to hold title.
Hi, I've been asked to present some questions on behalf of the Six Lakes Park Coalition. Sorry. And the really nice part of this is some of the questions I have, you've already answered in the presentation, so this will focus on the things that you didn't, but I want to say it's really nice to have had this much information about what was done and especially about what's coming next. The first question I want to ask has to do with the follow-up on the questions that others asked about. Why is this not being reported against a residential standard versus a industrial and commercial standard? Somebody described to me how these standards work as if, no, as the Olin is measuring stuff. That's like the cop with the radar gun. And the residential standard and the industrial commercial standard are like two different speed limits. So they have the data, and it's just a question of which one of those standards, or why not both of those standards, should be included in their reporting. If everybody that's talking about this in this room is saying, we think it should be a part, then it seems to me like it's, and then currently that would require a residential standard. It seems to me that one of the ways that, for example, we could put pressure on our friends at DEEP is to say, can you please make it requireable to include in their reports, not just the exceedances over the industrial commercial standard, but also the measurement of the exceedances over the residential standard. That seems like it's probably pushing a button in some software somewhere that will just make it come out that way. And I think it's something that the community deserves to know.
You have more questions? We take it.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's take them one by one, just so, because I don't want to forget any of the questions.
Thank
First, great question. The two standards, residential versus industrial commercial, it's the property owner's right under Connecticut law. Just because if a party wishes to clean up to an industrial commercial standard does not mean that there's still a degree of pollution there, yes, and it is safe for that intended use. Now, with respect to the Pine Swamp Cover Farm parcel, it is possible that Olin may see there's a certain area of the property It is extremely expensive. I'm making stuff up here, and just to play it out. Extremely expensive to clean up pollution in this particular area. We can clean up to an industrial commercial standard. And this property, this portion of the overall 100 acres may not be desirable for park space. Maybe we carve off 5 or 10 acres and make that industrial commercial. Maybe there is a need for a specific service or activity in the neighborhood that could utilize that property. So that's where maybe the residential cleanup standard works for the majority of the property and industrial commercial standard for another section, again, with that carve out option. That's, again, a conversation that needs to be had with Olin, but I will tell you, is on the table.
So if I understand you correctly, you're talking about as they're reporting to you, first of all, that's really good news. And the idea of creating some differentiation within the property in terms of certain areas being more appropriate for different kinds of activities. And perhaps being remediated to different standards based on that. Definitely seems to us like it's worth examination and further exploration.
I'm sorry, ma'am, can I add just one?
Yes, you may.
One more point. I think another aspect that could be very beneficial to this process is holding a community charrette. The charrette is an opportunity to seek input from the community. What is it that you want to see this property become? Is it all walking trails? Is it a combination of walking trails, tennis courts there, maybe raised bed gardens in a different location? That information, whatever the community settles upon, could be extremely valuable in those discussions when we start talking about remedial action, implementation, the plan, and the cost to implement.
Thanks for explaining what a charrette is, because we are currently working with the town to hold community park visioning sessions this summer, fall. So I think the timing seems like it's pretty good. And you've just explained what they're for.
We're thinking along the same lines.
Yes, that's great. I do want to ask that there's a section on the environmental program fact sheet part of your website that says polluted soil must be remediated to a concentration that is consistent with the residential direct exposure criteria unless the site is used exclusively for industrial or commercial purposes. So that, as I read it now for this presentation, that's about the actual remediation, which is different from the reporting question I asked earlier. But it does seem that if we're going to be in the future possibly talking about remediating to either one standard in one place and possibly another standard in another place. And also, I'm going to ask you to tell us more about the timeline for getting a passive recreation standard out there. If we know we're going to have that conversation is likely in the future, then I think it's important to put some pressure on Olin to just simply include, put in another 3,000 pages of data that are from which you can extract the 5 pages of text that say this is the comparison to the residential. But tell us more about what we can do to help get that passive recreation standard.
Passive recreation standard is a little bit beyond concept at this stage, but it is not yet woven into the anticipated regulation. So when I was talking about the regulation shift from transactional cleanup to you spill it, you clean it. So we refer to this as a release-based cleanup program. That's what we're shifting to. We have every intention of going in that direction to put, again, more in line with the rest of the nation.
And how long will it take?
And how long will that take?
And how can we help?
Oh, well, I I think that's a great question, and I would say that, please go on the department's webpage. Look up release-based cleanup. It'll take you right to that location. We hold working group meetings monthly. We're kind of winding down on that process, but which has been a public process for the last 3 years, where we seek input from a working group, and that working group, not to get into too much detail here, but it's composed of environmental consultants, environmental attorneys, environmental advocacy groups. We need to hear more from the citizens of our state. This is a good thing, Deep. Make it happen. That's what we want to be hearing. Or conversely, if you're seeing something that may be controversial, you have a question, we want to hear that as well. But I'll tell you, we will need the public support to make this shift from property transfer law to release-based use, spill it, you clean it. That would be very, very helpful to the overall cause.
Okay.
All right.
Can I shift gears to some of the material that John was covering earlier? About the next investigative work plan coming from, well, that being proposed by Olin. If I recall correctly from the presentation, it said if that's anticipated this summer or fall.
Correct.
And one of the things that we're interested in doing is to I have a commitment from you to meet with representatives of the coalition to discuss the testing plan and the proposed sampling design with input from some of the experts in the field who we've been consulting with along the way. And we would just like to propose that we do that before you accept and approve their plan. You can look at it, but please don't sign off on it without doing that first.
We are not approving the remedial action plan.
No, I'm not
What
putting
about-
out remedial actions.
The
There's a step
next step,
where you guys get to approve the IWP, and I want to see if I can get your agreement to meet this before you.
We're public servants. We work for you. We are always happy to share information. We can certainly connect with what I missed. We are happy to meet with coalition members. One, to alert you that a report has come in, a plan has come in, what have you. And we're happy to have a dialogue about it. So, yeah,
So before you say,
before we sign off, when we're talking investigation.
Yeah.
That's more so our area of expertise. So we're directing Olin Corporation and other responsible parties where you need to look, where you need to gather additional information to fill what we call data gaps. Again, because we're trying to figure out that, how many cubic yards of soil is actually impacted that requires remediation. We can certainly bring the coalition into the conversation prior to an approval.
thank you very much. I have one more question, again, goes to John's presentation, which is based on that based on that summer fall, expecting them to propose the work plan.
Right.
For investigation. They don't always deliver things right on schedule. They deliver them, but sometimes a little late. And the question I have is what is then your expectation about when the next round of testing would actually happen on this property? Which, can you just confirm for me that it's additional testing in the areas that they did the testing in last year?
Correct.
Plus, you expected to include some new testing in those other 13 or 14 areas that you were identifying early in the presentation.
There's a possibility.
All right,
They're definitely going to expand on their current investigation. I guess I was waiting to see what they're gonna provide.
the presentation made me very hopeful that you were, as you had suggested last year, and when it was also included in the presentation, that there will be a need to investigate this stuff. If they don't include it in the next work plan, we lose a lot of time. Frankly, the part of the property that might be more amenable to the parkland use, and so it's time to get started on investigating that stuff.
I'll,
Can you help us?
I can try and push that agenda.
That would be great.
I can't make any promises, but.
I understand.
I'll push that agenda.
Okay. That's the end of my questions. So thank you very much.
The coalition has given the idea that the cost of remediation probably be in excess of $8 million. In the event that Olin does spend $8 million or more dollars, what are they gonna look to us, being the town of Hamden or the state of Connecticut, to do?
In terms of,
Are they gonna, will they hold on? I mean, they're paying taxes on it, I understand that. Not a lot. But will they wanna sell it to the state? Will they give it to the state?
I think it's with a qualified answer that you're hearing from representatives of the state of Connecticut and not Olin Corporation. I think we can fairly relay to you that Olin has an interest in selling the property at the appropriate time. And that appropriate time is when the property has been thoroughly investigated and pollution has been remedied. So at that point in time, they may choose to sell to whomever, for whatever purpose someone desires. Again, having the conversation, the community conversation about what you desire this property to become, and to have a unified voice in realizing that vision, I think is very, very important. I also expect that there will be a time where the coalition will want to meet directly with Olin Corporation to express, here is the results of our charrette. Here's what we would like to see in the future. What say you, Olin Corporation? And ask them directly.
Thank you.
Is it possible to have a partial site remediation? Because the northern portion seems to be less contaminated than the southern portion. And if it could be phased in, then maybe the northern portion could be made available to the public sooner, while there's still remediation done on the southern portion.
Phased approach to environmental investigation and environmental cleanup is an option. It's not an option that DEEP can necessarily impose upon a private property owner, unless we have a specific set of circumstances. If we have pollution that is causing an imminent threat to public health, we are directing the responsible party. You are correcting this area first and foremost. At this point in time, and I doubt that we will see with the additional investigative work, the condition that rises to that occasion. That's just my hunch at this point in time. Nobody is accessing the property. It's privately held. It's gated and locked, right? So that pathway to human exposure doesn't really, it's not met at this point. So we can't say that there's an imminent threat. Again, based on the data that we have.
The water flows from these lakes into Lake.
Yes.
Is that a complicating factor at all?
So water flowing from the site to Lake Whitney, is that a complicating factor? Heck, yeah. Short answer. Yes, absolutely, no question, complicating factor. We will not want Olin Corporation to unearth pollution that may impact the water levels. We don't want to create substantial disturbance. So Lake Whitney being a public water supply source, we have pollution that appears to be on this property that is, I'm not gonna say isolated, but it does not appear to be moving to any great extent. That's just the nature of these types of pollutants. It may be different for other sites and other pollutants. But it's absolutely a complicating factor, something that we're very mindful of. The remedial action plan will absolutely need to address that.
Just to clarify on that. Y'all will be monitoring any movement of groundwater that could potentially contaminate either Six Lakes or the neighborhoods.
So in John's presentation, he identified not only where soil samples were taken on the property, but also where groundwater quality samples were obtained. And those are the monitoring wells that were referenced. It was one of the slides that showed how many, 20 something, 23 monitoring wells on the property. So yes, part of the investigation is to evaluate the pollution that is held within soil that's above the water table. When we have rain and snow melt falling on that soil, percolating through that waste material, picking up those contaminants. Are those contaminants mobile? Do they partition away from the soil particle, get into groundwater, and then move with ground? That's what we're looking for.
Kathy Seafield from Save the Sound. I work as land protection manager at Save the Sound, and I'm also a member of the Six Lakes Park Coalition. And I just want to follow up on what Justin was just asking you, because at the same time, there is some remediation continuing in the Newhall neighborhood, at the residential part of the neighborhood itself. And of course, we know that groundwater is all connected. So will there be any kind of testing, paying attention to anything that might potentially be migrating, anything that's being disturbed in that ongoing remediation that might be migrating onto the site? Or is it just, I mean, groundwater moves. So I'm assuming that if you're testing groundwater and something is coming in from the neighborhood, you'll pick it up. But I just wanted to clarify that.
Yes, short answer. Now comes the explanation. So what are we actually looking for? We're looking for contribution of contaminant load in stormwater coming onto the property. So we have a lot of urban runoff that goes into this property. Yes, there was also potentially groundwater pollution that may run onto the property. I underscore that word may. So siting, monitoring wells strategically, looking at quality of groundwater coming onto the property is something that Olin has done. They're not responsible for pollution from somebody else coming onto the property. They're responsible for their own mess. You know, you spill it, you clean it.
Except that Newhall is their own mess.
Well, I'm speaking more locally. Newhall is still local, but not like immediately adjacent to the property. Now, with respect to the Newhall neighborhood, with the extensive cleanup that we did, maybe time's flying, 10 years ago, give or take. The waste fill at depth in that neighborhood had been exposed to infiltration for 100 and something years. And I can safely tell you that we're not seeing any pollution in that waste fill material. It's in the material itself, but it's not liberating any contaminant into groundwater because it's already happened long time ago.
So we can be confident that you're not expecting to see things migrating, groundwater pollution migrating from
No,
those
not at all.
disturbances.
Not
Okay,
at all.
great, thank you. I also just want to mention to everybody that because several people have asked about how you can be involved, and Sue alluded to the fact that we're doing a series of charrettes or visioning sessions this summer. And so the best way, we don't have dates yet, but our intention is to convene a number of meetings this summer with maps and conversations and a survey at the end. So if you are interested in participating in that, we really would like to have broad participation. And if you have not already signed in with your email at the front desk, you can do that on your way out, and then you'll hear from us from the Six Lakes Park Coalition when that has been scheduled and planned. So I just wanted to let people know that. Who's on the microphone there? Thank you.
I want to bring up something that happened in Pennsylvania, because when they discussed there was natural gas that they could track, get it out of shale. They went ahead and did it, and they didn't tell anyone, and they ended up causing deaths and or extremely illness of many people there. And the state did not stop them. So what this does is, to me, is it brings up the issue of, if, let's say that Olin wanted to keep a certain portion of the property, and they wanted to remediate it to this level of, what do you call it, commercial? Industrial, commercial. We don't know, we have no way of knowing, what's going to happen in 50 years with that portion of the property. And I just find it amazing that a private company should be allowed to decide what happens with severe pollution around. I live right up the hill from that end of the lake. And so I'm not worried about it creeping uphill, but it just strikes me as very strange that a private company can determine what happens to a piece of land when there's severe pollution is there. And I don't see why the state of Connecticut allows any company to remediate any piece of land to any standard other than the highest standard. You know what I'm saying? It's not gonna work well.
Certainly a philosophical type of question. What do we want our state to be? Do we want it to be cleaned up to industrial commercial? And that's it. We've got all these industrial commercial properties. It doesn't mean that a property cleaned up to that standard can't later be cleaned up to the residential standard. And then we also have to be careful of due process. So my land, my property, it's my decision what happens with the property. To a point, right? You cannot be causing pollution that's impacting somebody else, your neighbor, human health in general, or the environment. So I think that the question is probably one that we could maybe have offline, but it's again more of a philosophical type issue.
I think it comes down to wishful thinking. That,
Well,
so, yeah, I'll talk about it.
Well, the person that referenced going on the department's webpage, the remediation division webpage, and they've referenced reading the cleanup standards, the remediation standard regulations. Note the language there. All properties shall be remediated to the residential standard. That is the default. Unless you're willing to, if your property is an industrial commercial use, it's zoned as such, and you're willing to apply a land use restriction, that preserves that property for that use and that use only. Doesn't mean that that's the way it's going to be in perpetuity. It's just maybe today, in this day and age, with the technology that we have, the availability of landfill space, maybe there's not the financial capacity to bring it to the residential standard. So we are trying to be very pragmatic, I would say, in wanting to be very protective of our drinking water resources, the health of our citizens, yet also being reasonable with business and industry in our state. So the two can go hand in hand. We've got many, many success stories. I wholeheartedly hear what you're saying and appreciate it. I really do. Actually, you first. I'm sorry.
So I'm kind of curious, I know that we were really pushing for the residential mediation standard. In that case, I know that, you know, the idea of walking trails and whatnot was proposed. Has there been any data collection on the wildlife, the plants and the fish that are in this area as well? I'm just curious about when these treatments are actually applied. What is this place going to actually look like in terms of foliage, in terms of the wildlife?
So what wildlife do we have present at this property? Yeah, other than deer, we know that, you know, they like the soil vapor points. Slightly outside the purview of this particular environmental investigation. Not entirely out of the question, but not the main focus whatsoever. When we're looking into the remedial plans and implementing those plans, it may be possible to do some electroshock fishing to determine what fish species we have in the ponds. My guess is that we're going to see a lot of the little sunnies in there. But yeah, we'll have to take a look at some of the other species.
Last year we had a bear on.
A bear, all right. I sent them from my backyard to yours. Yeah.
So basically, I don't know if it is like answer this, but I was just like wondering, like, once they finish with the park, are they still gonna keep up with it, or are they just gonna leave it to the? I live around the park and like this happened, like it gets lucky lovers. Destroy it, mess it up. And if they just don't come back, they don't fix anything. So I was just wondering, like, are they just gonna leave the project after it's done, or are they gonna just focus it?
So the question, so that I'll hear it, is if the property becomes that park that everybody wants, who manages that park space? Who's employing the upkeep? That's a question that's probably premature. You want to do that one? Okay.
Off the go.
So I'll say, because I see that we're coming towards the end, that is a great question. Ray and people at Deep and the health department have different expectations and a different role. Right, Olin has a responsibility, right? I would say Winchester has a responsibility to the community in this asset that is in the public interest. And so we can advocate to our elected officials and to our state departments for restoration of this asset and have restorative justice. And to your question, right, it's us, right? Just like how Sleeping Giant has the Friends of Sleeping Giant, right? We would like to see something similar when this all comes to fruition. And so we're a ways from that, but when we get there, right, it's gonna be up to us to make sure that we take care of this asset and that we have reciprocity to have the next generation after that take care of it. Also, to answer your question about how to get younger people involved, I know that we passed in our town charter that young people can be on our boards and commissions, and so I know the mayor's there shaking their head. And so I know we will get you connected and make sure that y'all are definitely part of the process because this is something for all of us. So just wanted to say that. Last thing is, right, Olin has been doing a great job being a community partner, working towards this goal. I also want to remind people it's a $10 billion corporation. So I know a lot of people are talking about money, but I'm like, I think they might have it. Right? Possibly, right? Any last burning question? Oh, third, yes, definitely.
So, whoop, there we go. I'm Kurt Johnson, used to be with Save the Sound and still very interested in this project. So I was very interested to hear you talk about the value of doing a charrette at this point, which is fantastic because the coalition is working on it. But one of the things that I think the department could be very helpful in that is to identify the areas on the property where you anticipate the contamination to be less. In other words, the areas that haven't been identified as being contaminated. Because when you're making plans in the relatively near future for public use, this cleanup could go on for another 8 or 10 years. I mean, maybe 5 years, you know, periods of time. We have a lot of public interest right now, and there's also a lot of public dollars available last time, right now. And Ray, I know you know that there's been times when the state has been strapped and there's $0 flowing out of Congress for anything. And we happen to be in a good time right now. So my question is, would you be willing to help us identify the areas where we have not identified contamination to help us with the planning process? Because that could provide some near-term opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. And you need that information to help plan through the charrette, what you want to do, where you want to do it.
Right.
So absolutely, we can and will provide a large-scale blow-up map of the property and identify the areas, pretty much with the color-coded green, yellow, red contaminant concentration bands that we saw on the screen earlier. That kind of gives you an indication. The green is just like a stop sign. Green is good. Yellow, yeah, we're starting to see some contamination. The red to orangey color, we've got some contaminants that are going to need to be addressed. So yes, we can provide that information.
I think that would be really helpful to have a period of time before the actual charrette, so that, you know, the coalition is aware of it and it can help direct. Okay, one last question I have, and this may be difficult for you to do, but if it's possible, I think it would be helpful in the 5 to 7 areas, the 7 areas you've already looked at, if you could identify the differences in contamination that you're seeing between 1986 to 1990 and today. Are those trending upwards, you know, heavily? Are they trending downwards heavily? Are they kind of even? Because I think that's helpful information for us just to see the timeline. I don't know if that's difficult to do, but that could be helpful information as well.
It certainly could be helpful. The challenge, however, is that from when the data was first collected in 86 to 2023, we were looking in parts per million. Right. We're now looking part per billion, part per trillion.
Right.
So it's kind of an apples and oranges type.
Well, if it was possible, it might be helpful.
It may be. I'm not discounting that it's not possible, but if we can show a trend, we'll see what we can do.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
From the timeline that you've given, what would you tell a major indicator of going up? Increase to the town?
Yeah, we don't have that.
Okay. Yes, please.
This is not just a question for the representatives from DEEP, but also just from for the Six Lakes Coalition and the Save the Sound Coalition. I was wondering how, just in general, you were planning to get the word out about this to more people, because especially people my age in high school, because I didn't learn about this until recently, and I know a large amount of other students in my classes and just in my school in general, who would really want to help and would have a lot to give to this project, but there's not a lot of awareness among younger students and just even within like some of the communities who don't live near New Hallville. So I was wondering how just in general you plan to increase awareness about this so that more people can, I don't know, give their voice and opinion on what should be brought to this park, because it won't just benefit the people who live in the vicinity, but just the town and the surrounding towns in general.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, we have a seat at the table, so, yeah, help us second, so, thank you.
I have a suggestion. Your club could invite us to come and speak. Give you the history of what's going on with Pine Swamp for 6 years. Just invite us. We'll be glad to come. Okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm almost hesitant to come back to the mic, because every time I do, someone has a new question. So thank y'all, thank y'all, thank y'all, thank you, Deep, for the time, thank you, Mayor, for putting this on. So if you have not signed the sign-in sheet, please do, please keep in touch, and look forward to next steps. Thank you, thank you, thank you, safe travels.